Hello, we are starting our broadcast. We're going to start off while people are entering with a little video for you to watch, and we will start as soon as that is finished. Here you go, about 3 minutes. Okay, welcome. I am Lisa Ruthig. I'm the chairman of the National Board of Certification for Animal Acupressure and Massage, and I'm here with Lola Michelin, who's the vice chair and one of the founding members, and she's going to talk to you about the legislative process and how to know what the laws are in your state and how to change them if they need changing. So I will turn it over to Lola. Welcome, Lola.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking to everyone tonight. Thank you for joining us for this discussion on animal therapies and the massage process, and sorry, the legislative process. Um, so I'll just share my screen at this point.
And Lola, just hang on 1 minute. I want to make sure that it's getting through to the people on the other side because it looks like they're just seeing. Okay. Sorry about this, Lola. I just want to make sure before you give your whole talk that everyone is actually seeing it. Okay. Okay. They say they're seeing it. I'm not seeing it through my look of them, but okay. They say they can see us, but Lola, your mic's picking up your breath, so you might want to move it away from you a little bit, but you can go ahead and we'll put your screen up and you can get started.
Okay. So tonight's topic will be taking action, navigating the legislative process, and we'll be looking at this issue from three aspects. First, we need to look at the growth of animal therapies in the United States from a historical perspective, and also gain an appreciation for the legislative process, as well as pros and cons of various regulatory models. And this will help us to make decisions about the next steps that we can take in guiding legislation in our regions. So why am I speaking to you tonight on this topic? My interest in legislation and all things legislative began at a pretty young age. As a junior in high school, I attended the Girl State, which is a national conference on political science. And then later, when I moved to Seattle, I got involved in the legislative process here because the animal massage industry at that time was facing some regulatory changes that needed to be addressed. So just to give you a little sense of my background, I am currently the Director of Education at the Northwest School of Animal Massage, a vocational school which I founded in 2001. And I studied animal science at Michigan State University as part of a pre-veterinarian program with a minor in genetics. And when I left college, I went to the zoological field where I worked as a veterinarian technician and a zookeeper for a number of years, and continued working as a veterinarian technician in large and small animal practices, as well as in a research facility as a pathology tech. All along the way, I had started my animal massage practice back when I was in college. So I've been practicing animal massage in one form or another, part-time or full-time, for a little over 25 years. So I've had an opportunity to see a lot about the growth of our industry and also the changes that have come about over the years from a legislative standpoint. As Lisa mentioned, I'm a founding member of the National Board of Certification for Animal Acupressure and Massage, and currently serve as the vice chair as well as the co-chair for the legislative committee of NABCAM. So now you know a little bit about me. I just want to take a moment and take a pulse with a short poll to find out, do you currently know the position, the legislative position on animal massage or acupressure in your state? So if you could just take a moment to answer that poll, that would be great.
And it'll probably, okay, they're starting to come in, but it'll
Great.
probably, they're a little bit behind us, so you'll see it coming in over time.
Okay.
So far we have 75% yes and 63-33 yes, no. So the no's are starting to catch up. And Lola, if you can't see the poll results, you can just click that little thing over on your right-hand side.
Oh, great.
All right, looks like it's come in at 69% yes, 31% no.
Okay, great. So many of you have already done some research into this subject. Others of you may be looking for ways to find out about the current legislative states in your region. So I'm going to share some ideas about how you might find out more about the legislative situation in your region. And I'm not sure why, but my slides are not advancing now.
Okay. Interesting. You can try unsharing your screen and sharing it again. See if they'll. And you can always go to the PDF if you need to. Sorry, just bear with us.
Okay. So thank you for chiming in on the poll. It sounds like about 3/4 of you are aware of the current regulations in your state. Here are some ideas about how you can gain information about the current status in your state. Most of them involve some internet work. Probably the easiest way to start your search is to simply look for animal massage regulations in the state where you intend to practice. I also recommend that you directly contact your state's Department of Health. You might also want to contact the veterinarian board in your state, as well as the Board of Massage, and ask them for their interpretation of the law in your state. We're going to talk a little bit later about how to interpret their interpretation, because this is the step where not only we get a lot of information, but often it's where people get misinformation, or there is a lot of confusion around interpretation of various practice acts. One of the ways to find the contact information for these boards is to visit your state government page. And that's simply a link. If you just search for your state by its abbreviation, .gov, it should take you directly to the page where you can look for the Department of Health or Veterinarian Board. Another excellent source of information on this is actually the American Veterinarian Medical Association. At their website, they have a page where they have a chart that describes the current practice acts in all 50 states. There are a few other listings that you can use for this information, including a listing provided by NABCAM and also the IAAMB. Excuse me. However, it's important to realize that some of these listings are not current because there's so much change excuse me, in current regulations that it can be very hard to stay current on these. So you'll want to confirm excuse me. You'll want to confirm any information you get from those listings with direct interpretations from the board. Another way to stay current on any changes going on in your state is to sign up for listserv emails with any of these boards. When you visit the State Department of Health page or the AVMA, they'll have an option to join their listserv group, which will notify you by email of any updates or changes needed. Of course, you can always contact NABCAM for information and help direct you to these sources. And we hope that tonight's presentation will also inspire you to perhaps join the legislative committee for NABCAM. So one of the things I want to do is just help with interpreting the Veterinarian Practice Act, because as I mentioned, this is a common area of confusion or concern for people. Most veterinarian practice acts will contain the following paragraph, and this is where interpretation can be challenging. In a nutshell, the veterinarian practice is defined as diagnosing, treating, prescribing, or providing a prognosis for any disease, deformity, defect, wound, or injury. Now, based on this practice definition, some people might interpret that to mean that many of the animal therapies we provide actually do fit within this description. However, what's important to realize when asking for an interpretation from the boards in your state is that we have to help the veterinarians and other professional practitioners to understand our scope of practice through our actions and through education. So in many cases, a simple conversation with the board about our scope of practice can help them to more properly interpret the regulations in your state. For instance, it's not within the scope of the practice of most animal therapies to diagnose, treat, or prescribe, or to provide prognosis. But this is one of the most common misconceptions or misinterpretations that other professions have about our work. So helping them to understand our scope of practice, both by our actions in staying within our scope of practice and by our conversations with both our clients and other professionals, will help to decrease the confusion created here. I also think it's clear that, or it's important that people are clear about the role of a regulatory board. When we talk about the Board of Veterinarian Governors or the Board of Massage, we're talking about a government agency or board that's been put in place to provide oversight and protection for its members. What a board is not authorized to do is limit or restrict the practice of other professions that don't fall under its jurisdiction. So the Veterinarian Practice Act is designed to help guide veterinarians and veterinarian technicians in the proper acting out of their jobs and their responsibilities, but it is not meant to restrict the opportunities or activities of other professions. So when I inquire with a state about their legislative position on animal therapies, I make a point to ask for very specific language. You can ask the board member that you speak with or their secretary to direct you to the specific code, chapter, or language where your modality is addressed. So this simple definition of veterinarian practice is really not where we get our information. It gives us a really good sense of what veterinarians do, and you'll find a similar definition under the massage board or other health professions. But what it doesn't do is help to identify how that relates to the work that we do as massage practitioners or acupressure practitioners or other modalities. So you'll want to make sure when you ask that you ask them to direct you to the language that specifically addresses your modality in regards to their practice. So currently there's several possible interpretations of the regulatory codes, and I want to just give you a little bit of information about each of them and also examples of states where each is the case. So in many states, it's still true that all animal therapies are allowed without regulatory oversight. The majority of states are not regulated when it comes to animal massage. For example, Indiana, Georgia, and even California, although recent activity in California may have some bearing on that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. In other states, there are very specific guidelines regarding the practice of certain animal therapies or modalities, and this is where licensed or regulated professionals only are allowed to practice those animal therapies. This would include states like my own state, Washington, Colorado, and Arizona. A third possibility is that it may be that in your state, animal therapies are allowed, but only with supervision. And supervision comes in a couple different forms, but it's usually under veterinarian supervision. The supervision may be direct, it may be indirect, and in a few cases, we have states that have a distinction called observed supervisory task. And for clarification, a direct supervisory task means that the veterinarian is on site, but not necessarily directly related to the service being provided. They may be in the clinical setting or available for consult, or if there is any sort of an emergency situation that arises. Observed supervision, on the other hand, is the most restrictive and requires that the veterinarian is present at the time that the service is provided. So this is a more restrictive and less common situation. The most common situation is indirect, where a task is assigned to a person based on their qualifications or education, and the veterinarian is available for advice or consult, and they may be available remotely, so they may not be on site, or the provider may be going out to provide the service. Some examples, just to further clarify that, would include an observed supervisory task might include when a veterinarian technician is providing anesthesia for an animal under intubation, and the vet would need to be in the surgical suite. An indirect supervisory task might be certain lab tests or examinations that are able to be done without the veterinarian present, but with them on premises. And an indirect supervisory task might include something like sending a technician or a qualified individual out to a client's home to provide fluid therapy for an animal. So there are a growing number of states where supervision is recommended for the provision of animal therapies. And that would include Alabama, Louisiana, New Mexico, and according to the AVMA, even Illinois, although that's up to some debate, I believe. We also have states where animal therapies are permissible when a prescription or a referral is provided. And these would require a relationship with a veterinarian, but they don't have to be restricted to the clinical setting. Many states, including Mississippi, Utah, New Hampshire, would follow this type of interpretation. And in Oregon state, although technically Oregon is not a regulated state, veterinarian referral is recommended by the veterinarian board. To date, they have not made any specific changes or added language to the Veterinarian Practice Act to enforce that, but it is their recommendation. We have a few states where we have the most restrictive interpretation, and that would be states where only a veterinarian or a veterinarian technician under direct supervision would be allowed to provide animal therapies. Tennessee and New York would be examples of states that have chosen this route, and that would be where it's specifically written in the Veterinarian Practice Act that those specific modalities are restricted to veterinarian practice. So hopefully that gives you some idea of ways to both research and gain information about your state, and then to help you in navigating the various interpretations. Once we are able to have that in mind, and before we can decide how to move forward, it's valuable to kind of look at how far we've come. So services have been provided for decades in the United States in animal therapies. And while my specialty is in massage, and that's mainly what I will speak to tonight, we're also talking about things like acupressure, chiropractic, Reiki, any of the energy modalities, and even sometimes in some states, things like dentistry or farrier work as well could be included in this conversation. Something that all of those professions have in common is that in their infancy, those services were really directed towards a highly specialized market or group of individuals. And the number of individuals providing those services was relatively low. So in the early days of animal therapies, it was only a small group that were aware of the services provided. And so the scrutiny of those services was very low. But when the services become more popular and the industry began to grow, both in demand for services and in the number of providers for the services, this is when we began to see scrutiny from outside organizations or other professions, and even began to hear some talk of regulation. This is the current stage that most animal therapies find themselves in, where there has been tremendous growth, or they're just beginning to see an increase in their popularity. And so we know that this is a time in which professions will have to face regulatory challenges and questions about how to standardize practice and standard of care. So what does that say about the future path for growth in animal therapies? It's safe to say that the landscape is going to change dramatically in the coming years, and that regulation will be more and more common. So states are beginning to look at ways to regulate animal therapies that both protect the consumer and provide for a national standard of care. And there's a variety of regulatory models that we can look at. We're going to look at two in this discussion, and we're also going to talk about pros and cons of each. So the first regulatory model that we can look at is a self-regulatory model. And this is by and large the type of model that animal therapies have existed under for many, many decades. And And in this model, individuals take responsibility for a personal standard of practice and code of ethics that they adopt based on their value system and their training. Industry groups can help to assist individuals in this model by helping to define and support good practices and good standards of practice within the industry. And that's largely the role that NABCAM tries to serve, is helping to be a voluntary organization that provides guidance in standard of practice and code of ethics, and provides a community for individuals who are looking for guidelines to self-regulation. So one example of a self-regulatory model that has been used in our industry is the animal owners' rights movement. So this movement was designed to ensure that animal owners maintain the rights to choose services and service providers for their pets and livestock. And we've seen this as a successful tool in protecting that right in states like Colorado, Florida, and Illinois, and most recently in California. So the animal owners' rights movements tend to advocate for non-regulation, but helping to maintain an owner's access to services. So we can look at the pros and cons of this type of self-regulating legislative model. The upside of a self-regulating model, and some people would refer to this as non-regulatory rather than self-regulatory, but in this type of environment, we have a broader access to services for the consumer. So consumer has a lot of choices in both what services they can access and who they can choose. It also provides a much easier entry to providers in terms of educational requirements and just ease of entry into the field. As a result of that, it tends to be a very economical model, meaning that services remain affordable for the most part, and we have low overhead costs to be involved in the industry, which those savings are then passed on to the consumers through a standardized price. And in a self-regulatory model, you're probably going to see a less restrictive environment for practice. Some of the downsides of a self-regulatory model might be that this same lack of restriction and broader access makes it difficult for consumers to assess the quality of service being provided. And in fact, in most self-regulating industries, there's going to be a much wider range of quality of service. This also has an impact of having a greater fee variability, meaning although it may be economical to get access to the services, there's often a much wider range of pricing. And because of the lack of standardization, you will have individuals who grossly overvalue services, and also you'll have individuals who grossly undervalue services. So these environments can be difficult from a competitive standpoint. And those providers who are qualified and providing services at an economical fee may feel pressure from individuals who are undercutting the industry, or they may get competition from people who are overpriced. Probably one of the biggest downsides to a self-regulatory model is the lack of protection it provides. And that means for both the consumer and for the provider themselves. In a non-regulated state, it's often the case that a provider isn't able to obtain practice insurance, for instance, or may not have access to some of the other benefits that a health profession would normally provide. The last item here on the slide is fragility of status. And what this means is that a self-regulating model is not a clearly defined model, so it can change at any time. And this is what we're currently seeing in California. As a result of some proposed language changes from the California Veterinarian Medical Association. The practice of animal therapies is being threatened because the veterinarian board wants to define it as part of animal rehabilitation and restrict it to the practice of veterinarians or veterinarian technicians only. So the animal owners' rights movements and other movements afoot in California have worked hard in recent months to get a lot of support for revising the proposed language or blocking any kind of restriction to access to animal therapies. What's important to realize is that as that fight goes on, without some language put in place to protect the animal owners' rights or regulations to define the various animal therapies, that same sort of situation could arise every few years, anytime that another regulatory body decides to propose new language. So what's another model that we might be able to utilize? A government regulatory model is going to be where we have a government organization or body providing oversight and protection, either from an already existing body or through the creation of a new professional governing body. And in this model, there is a definitive statement that indicates what the minimum requirements for education and for practice would be. So we do have some examples of states that are following a government regulatory model. The one that I'm most familiar with because of my involvement, of course, is Washington. But there are some other states that already have existing either certification processes or specifically define the education required for practice, such as Colorado. So just to look at an example of that, in Washington state, we designed a language to help recognize animal massage practitioners as independent licensed healthcare professionals under the State Department of Health and not subject to veterinarian supervision or referral. So this was really a several step process, and I won't spend a lot of time going through it because we're going to talk about the legislative process in here in just a moment. But basically in Washington, we had to first find an existing board due to urgency in the timing of legislation. And so our choices were either the massage board, the veterinarian board, or the PT board, a physical therapy board. And all of those had existing regulatory boards. And the veterinarian board was in support of animal therapies, but was not interested in extending their oversight just due to the responsibilities they were already facing. And the physical therapy board was at that time not interested in dealing with any kind of animal-related therapies. So we were fortunate enough to work directly with our massage board to provide an opportunity for people already licensed by that board to practice animal massage. So the challenge in that was that if you were not licensed by the massage board, then you were practicing in a non-regulated environment, which still allowed you to practice, but didn't provide protection. And because there were some regulatory restrictions proposed by the vet board, it threatened the opportunities for those individuals. So we went back to the legislature in 2007 and worked for 3 years to define a licensure and a separate professional board. So that's a pretty drawn out process, but it has resulted in an environment where people can practice and be licensed and have that protection that the language won't change without their input. So what are the pros and cons of this type of model? Well, as I mentioned, it does provide recognition for people's experience and education, and it definitely defines the standard of practice. It sets at least a minimum bar to which all providers must maintain their skills. It does provide a measure of consumer protection as well, because this standardization of practice gives consumers at least a scale to which they can compare the services being offered. And it helps to create a more level playing field in terms of fee scales. It's much harder to have overpriced services or underpriced services in a closely regulated model such as this. But there are some downsides as well. Certainly one of the perceived downsides is that when there's a regulatory board in charge of licensing or registering individuals, it restricts entry to the field for not just some, but many individuals, either because they can't meet the educational requirements, or maybe it creates some financial hardship for entry into the field. So it can be a restrictive model, to be sure. It also introduces paperwork and additional fees. So it does tend to increase the fees to the consumer as well, because people have to maintain their licensure and pay renewal fees and do more paperwork as part of their practice administration. Another barrier in a government regulatory model is a portability factor. So for individuals who are licensed and already practicing in a regulated state, their portability or ability to practice in other states is probably pretty good. They already have a licensure. But for individuals moving from a non-regulated environment into a state that has specific regulations, this can be a huge barrier to portability of their services. For instance, somebody moving into Washington from a non-regulated state may have to return to classes through a state-approved program. They may have to increase the number of hours of training that they've completed, and that may delay their opportunities to practice considerably. For some people, this doesn't seem to be much of a barrier because they may only be providing their services in the region where they live. But portability becomes a big factor for those people working in sporting industries or with competitive animals. Horse shows and dog shows often occur over several states, and so people may be traveling across borders, and therapists may be limited in their ability to travel with their clients. So based on the conversation so far, and knowing now a little bit about a self-regulatory model and government regulatory models, I'd just like to stop and take another short poll and find out which would you favor most? Does a self-regulating method appeal to you? Or are you more likely to enjoy the protections and oversight provided by a government regulatory method? Or perhaps you're undecided. So let's just take a moment or two to look at that.
All right, they're starting to come in. We've got no one so far favoring self-regulatory, 56 favoring government, 44 undecided. And they're still listening to your explanation of the government regulatory model. Okay. I got a few in for self-regulatory.
That's interesting.
I know I used to really favor it just because of those fees and barriers to entry that it seemed like, school is expensive enough. And but I live in a state where there's certain education. I'm in Connecticut, and there's certain education is mandated. So it's legal, especially it's legal for me because I meet the educational standards, but there's still uncertainty, and there are people within the government that aren't even aware of the law and that can raise problems. Yeah. And then what do you do when you see people who aren't properly educated doing it? That
exactly.
So do you take action on that, or do you just let it go? So
I think that's the biggest challenge people face with the self-regulatory model, is just not being able to control the those individuals working out of their scope or working under the guise of one thing and doing another.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like there's votes are still coming in. We have 15% for self-regulatory, 50 for government, and 35% undecided.
Great. Okay. Interesting. So, so we have, people on all three, landing on all three, but a surprisingly high number, half of you favoring a government regulatory method, which I guess is good news, and many undecided, which is not surprising given everything I just threw at you. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is now share with you what I call my a 10-step program to taking action. And these are steps that are required along a legislative path and may be steps that you would want to be involved with on your own path to practicing in your state. And I just want to start by saying that people could get involved in legislative action on any level. It may be that you only want to be involved in a couple of these steps that I'll describe. It may be that you want to be involved in the entire process, but it's important to know that, well, two things. It really does take a number of people working together to create positive change. And also, if you think, I'm not interested in getting involved in legislative action, or I don't want to draw attention to myself and my practice, or my state already has taken a position and I just have to live with that, then I would just put out there that most states are moving in the direction of at least looking at, if not proposing, regulation on animal therapies. And so they are going to undergo change in the coming years. And if we direct the change, then we get to set the language by which we have to live. But if we choose not to be involved, then what often happens is the decisions are left to other professions who may or may not understand what it is we provide or do. So without us helping to educate and drive some of that change, we could find ourselves having laws put in place that don't match our needs. So I would encourage people to look at the steps involved and at least get involved on some level, even if it's just keeping track of information in your state. So let's look at each of these steps individually, and we'll start with the first two. In this program, the first thing you want to do is identify some like-minded individuals, and it may be that you can join an existing group in your area. It may be one of the animal owner rights group that I mentioned in different states. It may be an organization like NABCAM that will help to provide some activity or direction. Or it may be that you find a few other of your cohorts or even clients who would like to promote some new ideas, and get those people together. Even if it's just to form a discussion group and get together for coffee and discuss the industry, or you might go so far as to actually create an association or an alliance. If you want some formal recognition of your group, then you could file paperwork to establish an association. And these associations are normally a nonprofit organization, although not typically a charitable organization. It's just a group of like-minded individuals who want to promote an idea. So once you identify these people or join a group, then it's time to determine your platform or your message. So that's going to involve just discussing and creating what you want to create or desire for the profession in your state. And that will usually lead to some discussion and debate around the matter. And from that discussion, you should be able to start to formulate a position statement or some sort of brief description of who you are and what you hope to create, what type of change you hope to create. And as I mentioned before, this type of activity tends to take a village, but it can start with a very, very small village. In Washington State, we actually had 3 people who got together and started drafting legislation as a result of some of the regulation that was being proposed. But by the time we were done, that group had grown considerably to dozens and dozens of people. And part of the way that we grew that group was to identify supporters and also to start to identify who might stand in opposition of our ideas. So it's important, for instance, I'll use the example of if your group decides that you want to promote a level of certification in your state that recognizes animal therapies, then you'll want to look for other people that would support that action. And that might include things like special interest groups who are affected by the change. It might include your clientele or potential clients who rely on your services for their animals. There's also local horse and dog associations, or even national horse associations and dog associations that might want to lend their support. And lastly, you might want to look at what other pet professionals might be impacted or affected by those changes. They may want to help support your idea if it looks like something that would further the interests of their industry or their businesses. And again, I'll use an example here. In Washington, one of the special interest groups that helped us in promoting legislation was a group called the Horsemen's Benevolent Association, which is a equine welfare group for owners of racehorses. And these individuals were very dependent on our services as massage and acupressure practitioners. And they were very interested in making sure that they had access to the services. At the time that I got involved with legislation in Washington, the Veterinarian Board was looking at restricting those services to the Veterinarian Practice Act. And the Horsemen's Benevolent Association was very much against that because of the timing of the race season. So they were integral in us being able to get legislation in place quickly to protect us that were providing the services because they already had legislative experience and they had a lobbyist on retainer that we were able to use as an advisor. So sometimes the help you need is going to come from an unexpected source, and you'll need to go out and identify those sources. It's also really important at this stage to identify possible opposition. So you want to look at what groups or individuals might be adversely affected, or at least they might perceive that they would be adversely affected by the change in legislation that you're proposing. And this might include competing professionals who think that your services might compete for their time and dollar. It might include individuals who simply are opposed to government regulation. So anti-regulatory lobbyists often are just looking for bills or proposals that will increase the size of government, and they may speak out in opposition of those, not because they disagree with the underlying idea or the group itself, but just that they don't agree with advancing regulation. And then sometimes there's private citizens who might feel that they're going to be affected or impacted by that bill. So one of the reasons I suggest that you identify your opposition before you actually draft legislation is that many times it's these groups that help you hone your message. By approaching them and talking to them before you draft legislation, you can find out what their concerns are, and it may give you an opportunity to bring them over to the supporting side, but it also might give you some ideas of what types of concerns you're going to have to counter or mitigate for your legislators and for your supporters. So these are critical steps, I believe, in getting ready to draft legislation. So the next steps is where we're going to start to describe the legislative process in terms of introducing legislation. And this is kind of the draft and drop portion of the program. Drafting legislation is, it might seem like that would be a really complicated task, but there are a group of individuals in your government offices that are waiting to help you with this step. And really, you need nothing more than a clear list of your desired goals to help draft legislation. If you take that information to your state government, you'll be directed to what's called the Code Revisor's Office. And the Code Revisors are the people who take information and put it into legalese. So they will actually look at your ideas, they'll rewrite it in a way that can be presented to the legislators, and they'll also look at the impact that your proposal may have on other existing laws, because that's kind of key, is that if you're proposing language, it can't be in conflict or disagree with existing laws. So the code revisors will help you to identify those areas, and then you can revise based on that. And then once they are satisfied with the draft, you will receive 3 copies of that draft, one for you to keep or your group to keep, and the other 2 are the bills that you're going to introduce into legislation. So just like in the federal process, like in the video we watched at the very beginning of this presentation, when you're doing state legislation, you're going to introduce that legislation to both your House and your Senate, so the House of Representatives and your senators. And literally we call it dropping the bill, because most states will have a wooden or metal box in the Code Revisor's Office where they literally just drop a copy of the bill into that box for both the House and the Senate. And then a group of secretaries will pick up and distribute those bills appropriately so that they can be added to the committee scheduling, hopefully. So at this point, you will start to just watch the legislative committee calendar to see if your bill is picked up. And it'll be picked up in one or the other, either the House or the Senate, but not both. So don't be discouraged. If you get to this point and you have House members that show interest in your bill, the Senate will then drop your bill because they don't need to see it on the first pass. Anything that goes through the House of Representatives, if it passes the House of Representatives, will then go to the Senate for a vote. And same with the Senate. If the Senate bill is picked up, then the House of Reps will wait to see if it's going to pass through them first. So you'll have committee hearings in both to think about. So if you get to this point and you've introduced a bill, now we get to the fun part of legislation. I think this was the most satisfying aspect of being involved in creating legislation. And this was the public relations piece, where you get to educate your legislators. Once you know you're going to introduce a bill, or your group is going to introduce a bill to the legislator, you want to identify what committees are most likely to hear your bill. Now in animal therapies, it's probably going to be an agricultural committee. So you would want to identify all the members of the agricultural committee, and then you'll want to contact them through their aides, their individual aides, to schedule a meeting. And you're going to spend a lot of time, hopefully, you and your other members of your group, meeting with your legislators to give them an idea of why your bill is important and why they should support it. So it's very important that you hone your message to be able to communicate to them why you think this is an important change in a very short time. You'll usually only have about 2 to 5 minutes to speak with a legislator prior to your committee hearing. But during that time, you can get them a lot of information. And if you make it to this stage, the 2 things that I would recommend is, make sure you can talk to your message, that you can give them your bullet points, but also have it written so that you can hand it to them and they can view it at a later time, because legislators have very, very tight, busy schedules. They're running from one meeting to another, and frequently they'll be interested in your idea, but they won't be able to actually do the research on it till later. So make sure you leave them with something that they can look back to. And the other thing I would say, if you get to this step, is wear sensible shoes, because you will do most of your public relations on foot, meaning many of the conversations that I've had with our senators and House representatives were in the hallways or in the bathroom or on the way to lunch, or in closet-sized spaces between committee hearings. So you'll want to make sure that you're prepared for that. And then you'll also, during this time, be soliciting support for your bill so that individuals know that it's going to be coming up in committee, and maybe petitioning people, both petitioning them for like signed petitions so you can submit their support to at the committee hearing, but also petitioning people to maybe write testimony or send letters to their legislators. As a matter of fact, this slide is a very good representation of what's going on currently in California, where many individuals are working hard to write their legislators, to get their clients to write legislators, to petition signatures, and make sure that they're getting support to prevent the restrictive language being adopted by the Vet Board. The next couple steps are going to be the committee hearings. So if your bill is picked up and it makes it to the committee schedule, then you'll be given a day and time that the committee will be reading your bill and voting on it. So you'll want to attend those hearings, or have at least as many members of your group as possible attend the hearings. And when you arrive, you'll sign in and indicate whether or not you want to testify during the hearing. Make sure if you decide to testify that you stay on message. You'll have only a few moments to talk to the committee members, but most of them you'll have already spoken to in your public relations efforts, and all of them will have had a chance to review the bill being proposed. So you'll want to just address the most important aspects, and also anything new that you want to introduce that you haven't had an opportunity to express to them in that time. After the committee hearing is over, be sure to send out thank yous to all the people involved, the committee members, and sometimes I would even look at the sign-in sheet after the meeting and see if there were individuals who had testified or attended the meeting who I had not previously identified as either supporters or opposition, because they may now become potential supporters for the future. And step 9, I say, is the rinse and repeat step, because at this point we go back to more public relations. Your bill is either going to move from one committee to the next, so you're going to have more committee hearings ahead, and you're doing more of the footwork of getting your supporters in line and making any revisions that might be necessary to move the bill further along. And if it makes it through the vote of the House or the Senate, then it will go to the next step where it is heard in the other House. Or if it was a Senate bill, it'll go now to the House. If it was a House bill, it'll now go to the Senate, and you'll have to do all of the work again to garnish support and get people to the committee hearings and educate your legislators. If all goes well and you get through all of these steps, then hopefully by the end of the session you are celebrating your new law as it is signed into act. Or you might be looking at repeating the process in the next legislative session, or you may be having to go back and revise your bill and reintroduce it at another time. And that's very common. Many bills don't make it through the legislator in their first session, and it can be for a number of reasons, not necessarily that the bill is voted down, but it may never make it to the calendar if it's a busy year. Dropping bills in a budget year can be really challenging to get them through. And it may just be that they want you to go back and rewrite things a little bit and reintroduce the bill in the next session. On average, a law can take about 3 years to get through the process. We were very fortunate in Washington that our first bill made it through to law in just 4 months, but the second action took a little over 3 years. So just be aware that it's a lot of work, and the results are always worth it. So in closing, I'd like to just take another quick poll and see, now that you know what's in stake and how to get involved, how likely are you to get involved? And it looks like several of you are chiming in here. A few undecided.
We have 33% very likely.
Excellent. Good. And a very small percentage of you, I didn't scare off too many people. Looks like only 10% are unlikely to get involved, and that's a fine position as well too. So before I field some questions, and while the last of our poll results are coming in, I do want to take the opportunity to thank you for joining us for this webinar. From both the National Board of Certification for Animal Acupressure and Massage and from the Northwest School of Animal Massage, we know how valuable your time is, so we appreciate you spending it with us and having an interest in legislation regarding animal therapies. And as a thank you for attending, the Northwest School of Animal Massage would like to offer a tuition voucher in the amount of $150 for any individuals enrolling in our performance or rehabilitation courses. You can access that tuition voucher at the link provided here, or you can call our offices and just mention the NABCAM webinar that you were a part of. And when you enroll in either the performance or rehabilitation level trainings, that voucher can be applied towards your tuition. Just our way of saying thank you for attending, and thank you for continuing to promote a high standard of practice in the animal massage industry. So at this time, if we'd like to open it up to questions, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Before we do that, is there a time on this offer that expires?
Oh, thank you. No, that would be good through the end of the year.
Okay. Awesome.
So expires December 30th.
All right. And wonderful. So they're just catching up, but we have a Makes Me Proud to be licensed in Washington. Thanks, Lola. And so, my offer that I had was a different offer. I'm going to put it back up because it has the link in it.
Okay.
So the offer I have prepared says 25% off, but this looks better. So I think I am, but it will have the link for you.
And NABCAM members are always, of course, welcome, given a 10% discount on classes. So,
all right, and okay. Yes, and I will email that link out to attendees. Yes, I will. Do we have any questions? And people can type questions in the chat. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I just want to say you can learn more about NABCAM at nbcaam.org. We also have a Facebook group. And If you are a member, we have another webinar coming up this month called Palliative and Hospice Acupressure to Mitigate Pain and Offer Comfort. So if you're a member, you should have gotten an email inviting you to that, and we're the link that you can sign up for it. If you didn't get it, you can send us an email at info@nbcaam.org or nabcam.org, and we will get you that. And so we have some questions coming in. Can the veterinary board change their language and take back this modality?
So if you are in a state where there's already an existing law protecting and providing for professional practice, then it is very unlikely, very, very difficult to rewrite the Veterinarian Practice Act to provide that restriction. Again, like I said, anytime new legislation is proposed, it has to go through the code revisor's office, and they're going to look at how it impacts or affects other individuals. And so that's one of the keys of, having that protection in place prevents a drastic change like that from occurring, because if you are already a recognized profession, then there's a lot of laws protecting you from not being pushed out or shut out. But if you are in a state with no regulation, then in that case, it's there's less restrictions to either veterinarian board or physical therapy board or any other profession proposing a change or a restriction to legislation.
Okay, and we have, let's see, Scott is finding it hard to understand the laws in Texas. He'll go back and reread them, but we'd hope to get a more clear understanding. Are you aware of what's going on in Texas right now?
So according to the American Veterinarian Medical Association, and they've done a pretty good job of compiling the current regulations. These aren't based just on their guidelines, but it's actually just a collection of the current regulations. So the things that are restricted in Texas to veterinarian practice only include acupuncture and homeopathy. However, things that are allowed without veterinarian, things that are allowed under certain provision include accepted livestock management practices, which would include things like giving vaccinations and doing castrations. Musculoskeletal manipulation and chiropractic may be practiced under the supervision of a veterinarian. Equine dentistry may be performed by a licensed equine dental provider, and some services may be provided by the animal's owner without supervision. So it would look like, in terms of massage and chiropractic, those would be supervisory. It doesn't say if it's direct or indirect, so that would mean that you would need to have a relationship with a veterinarian who was willing to provide some oversight. If it's indirect supervision, that often doesn't need to be the veterinarian of the animals who you're working on. It just needs to be a veterinarian who will provide oversight or advice if you have questions. So it's important to kind of make sure you know whether it's direct or indirect supervisory. And it doesn't state here in the AVMA, but what I would do is call the Texas Veterinarian Board directly and say, I know this is the AVMA position and the current position, but I'm just wondering if that supervision has to be direct or indirect, and hope it's indirect.
Okay, thank you. Laura asked, do all changes to the policy of a vet board require a bill to change it?
No. So boards do have some ability to change regulatory language without having to go back to the legislature. And that's, again, the current situation in California is that the California Veterinarian Medical Association is making some proposed changes to their regulatory language without dropping a bill. So usually it's only new legislation or change to the specific letter of the law that has to be introduced into the House or the Senate. So a regulatory board can change some things, but usually it's only that they can change things like fees or forms, paperwork that they're in control of. And remember, this is where it's important to remember that a board is only able to regulate its members. So a vet board can only change the regulations relative to the veterinarians or the vet techs. And again, if there is a provision for animal owner rights, or there's a provision for other animal modalities outside of the veterinarian board, they can't just change that by changing the Vet Practice Act. But there are some things that they can change within the regulatory language without having to necessarily go to the legislature. That's why it's really important, like I said, to get on those listservs, so that if they're making a proposal, like the current proposal in the current proposal in California is just to redefine a definition that they already have for animal rehabilitation, but they're proposing extremely restrictive language so that anything like massage or acupressure would be considered rehabilitative, where we know that in many cases we're using these therapies in a non-rehabilitative environment. So, and that's why there's so much opposition to their language. My guess, just based on experience, is that there will be some changes made in California to their language, but they won't be anywhere near as restrictive as what's being proposed, just based on the backlash. And they have 2 more meetings scheduled. One is for October 20th, just coming up here shortly, and then they have to have another public hearing. So they're likely to get additional opposition that will help guide them in revising the language to be less restrictive.
Okay. And correct me if I'm...
people can do to help with that, you know. You don't have to be a California resident to chime in or to sign a petition or join a group there to help support the changes in California, because what's important to realize is that as more states adopt regulation, they set a precedent. So when it's your state's turn to look at legislation, they're going to look at, like, well, what are they doing in Texas? And what are they doing in Washington? And what are they doing in California? And then base their changes on what's already existing. So.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, what a vet board would do if they feel that you are stepping into the scope of a veterinarian, because they can regulate veterinarians. They can't so much regulate us, but they can decide that we're acting as a veterinarian.
Right.
Within that definition, they would send you a cease and desist letter, and then you would have to cease and desist, or else you would face whatever fines or criminal.
Or else you'd probably get fines.
Yeah.
And for what most states do is that if they get reports that you are, or that an individual is doing things outside of their scope of practice that fall under the definition of veterinarian medicine, like I'll give an example. In Oregon, massage therapy is not regulated, but chiropractic is. You have to be a human chiropractor or a veterinarian chiropractor to provide chiropractics. So there are some individuals, or have been in the past, individuals who are doing chiropractic work but calling it massage therapy, so that they don't, trying to kind of work under the radar. Well, if there's a complaint filed, and there have been complaints filed against those individuals to the vet board, then the vet board will send that individual a cease and desist, because that individual has clearly violated the Veterinarian Practice Act by doing chiropractic work without the proper licensing. That person will get a cease and desist letter. If they continue to work, they'll get fined, but they'll also get referred to what's called the Non-Practice Act board. So there's a board to just deal with people who feel the need to work out of their scope of practice. So even though the veterinarian board can't go after that person beyond a cease and desist or a fine, the non-practice board can. They can be the ones who actually could enact greater fines or jail somebody if they're practicing without a license.
Okay, and we have a good question from Jody, is if they're working in a state where it's actually illegal, that is it okay to do education? So to teach workshops or private education of owners?
That's a good question, because that is sometimes the loophole that people use, is that oftentimes, even if you can't provide a service, you can provide training or education in that service, which seems a little odd, but many programs have an international audience, so they may be training people from all over the country, and it's not the school, the program's responsibility to determine if that person can legally practice in their state. So can you teach people to do massage if you can't do massage, is kind of a rewording of that question. If you are accepting a fee, then you might be violating and this is where it would be valuable to ask for the specific language from your vet board or the animal or the board of massage as to what is the limitation in providing these services. Because if you're collecting compensation as you're teaching the owner to do a massage on their animal, they may consider that a violation of the Practice Act.
So it would depend on the state.
Yeah,
basically.
unfortunately, a lot of times it does.
Okay, and we have from Valerie wants to know how she can find a petition to help out those in California. And we did have one posted on our Facebook page that may still be active.
Yeah, there's a couple links floating around. I apologize, I don't have it right here, but I know it was on the NABCAM Facebook page for a little while. It's also on, there's an organization called California Animal Owner Rights. I don't know if they're a formal organization yet, but they definitely have a Facebook presence, and they had a petition. So if you're in favor of that model, you could join their group and sign their petition. The other petition, I think, was being promoted by Equinology, one of the schools in California. And so if you can't find the link to that petition, you could directly contact Equinology, and I'm sure that they would be happy for your support and direct you to the bill or to the petition.
Okay, and Gina is in Rhode Island, and she says she looked up her law, and it says vet only or under direct supervision, but she sometimes does massage in people's homes when referred by her vet. Is that a potential problem? Human beings can't massage without a doctor's order, but I guess that's because they're licensed. Human massage used to be where we were,
right? Yeah,
years and years ago, and then they, in most states, got their own board, and so we hope to be where they are soon. But yeah, there are plenty of people in Rhode Island doing it not under the direct supervision of a vet, and so that would be if someone got upset about that and reported it, that they might take action. But to my knowledge, no cease and desist letters have ever gone out in Rhode Island. Do you have any?
I think that's the situation in a lot of states where it may be regulated and a lot of people are practicing, and I'm certainly not promoting or condoning that, because then it is harmful to the industry as a whole. But it is true that historically, whether you're talking human massage or animal massage or other therapies, oftentimes that's what happens is there's no regulation, and then something happens that puts overly restrictive regulation in place, and then people keep practicing because the consumers are still wanting the services, and that kind of sets the stage for better legislation to be put in place, because you can go to the legislature and argue, well, look, these people, obviously consumers want the services and it's not being provided under the current restrictions. I mean, like, for instance, if we restrict animal massage or acupressure to vets only, it's very unlikely that people are going to have access to that service. There might be a handful of vets who want to provide massage, but it's going to be much lower than the number of people, paraprofessionals, that want to provide massage. And the fees are going to be different if you were paying a vet to do the work versus a paraprofessional. So if the consumers continue to want the services and people will continue to do it despite the fact that they're breaking the law, that tends to help legislators decide to do the change. So if you went and said to your legislators, look, we need to change the Vet Practice Act and create an opportunity for people to do massage because people want it and the vets can't provide it, then you're more likely to get that change. So in a way, if people are working under the radar, it often helps drive change. But on the other hand, I'm certainly not promoting that, because you could get in substantial amount of trouble, and the fines are often not cheap. But Maryland's a great example where we had an individual who got a cease and desist letter. She continued practicing. She refused to bow to the veterinarian board, and eventually she created a tremendous force behind her and got positive change put in place in Maryland. So sometimes that's unfortunately what it takes to get it done.
Yeah. So she actually won a court case. So the Institute of Justice, who's also representing the women in Arizona that got cease and desist letters. So that's another route that you can go. They'll sue on your behalf for right to work. In the end, Maryland's unregulated right now, so that's
Right.
not the best either. So anybody can practice, even if they've had a weekend of education. So that's not great on that. So legislation's better, but if you do get a cease and desist letter, there are people that will help you.
Yeah. And I used to be in, the non-regulation camp. I didn't want anybody telling me how to do my job when I was younger. But I've seen the harm that can do too, either because you don't, you have no control over who's providing services, and animals can get hurt and consumers can get, punished by that. But also, most importantly, we can be punished by that sort of an environment because we have no protection. So it's not a matter of restriction. It's a matter of writing good legislation that promotes good practice and protects us as providers and protects the consumers as our clients.
Okay, we have a question from Kathy, who does free massage and acupressure in New York on retired racehorses. Is that a violation? So she's not charging.
So that's always an interesting little loophole. If you're not accepting any kind of fees or compensation and you're acting as the animal's owner's agent, then there usually isn't any concerns or ramifications to that, which again, great, except it doesn't guarantee the quality of service. I mean, that's the problem in that, is that there's no standard of practice required for people to provide services for free. I think it's great that, especially as an educator for our students, while they're moving towards getting licensed, it's great that they can go out and provide services for animal shelters or rescue organizations, or they can start building clientele without charging for their service and get the much needed practice. But as a rule, like to just be using that as how you provide services, I don't think is a good long-term solution. I don't think you'd be in any violation though, if you're not accepting any kind of compensation, trade. They're very specific. I mean, you can't get tips, you can't get, a lesson or something in trade for that. You can't accept any compensation in any form.
Okay. Patty wants to know, is the regulations list by state on the avma.org website? I believe it is, but you can easily just Google your own state's Veterinary Practice Act and you'll get it.
Yeah. The AVMA site has it under advocacy. They have advocacy section on their website that has the government regulations by state, and it's pretty comprehensive. Again, I would say any of those charts that are kept regarding current state legislations are great, but not 100% reliable, because change is happening every day. So it can be very hard to stay current. So I wouldn't rely on those lists for current information. I think they're great guidelines, and then just back it up with a call to your state.
We had one go by that I missed that asked about Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah. Massachusetts is a funny one. I had to read this a few times too to feel confident about it. And I'm still going to look at my sheet. I'm not going to speak off the cuff about it. So Massachusetts, I know that licensed massage practitioners can perform animal massage if they have appropriate training, but that doesn't mean that it's limited to massage. It just means that the massage board took the steps to add practitioners, their members, their licensed professionals, to add that provision so that they can provide massage without threat to their license, right? So it says accepted livestock management practices. That usually means you can vaccinate your own cows, that type of thing. Veterinarian or surgical works. I don't know what that means. The giving of advice to a neighbor by a person who does not hold himself out as a veterinarian or receive compensation. So extremely vague. Extremely vague. Which means if I were in Massachusetts, I would want to call the Veterinarian Board of Governors and say, could you define that a little better for me? Like, for instance, if I'm giving my neighbor's horse a massage, is that Is that allowable under this language?
And we
get a
did
proper
actually
interpretation.
call them in 2008. The veterinarian that I was working with called them because she couldn't get me on her insurance unless it was considered veterinary care. So she called them and they said, no, it is not veterinary care. And therefore I had to get my own insurance, which is fine, which I did. But as you said, it's incredibly vague. So it is interpreted by the current board however they tend to interpret it. And in 2008, they interpreted it that it wasn't veterinary care, but they could change their mind if they have a new composition of the board. Though the Veterinary Association in Massachusetts, I think the most, I know their president, and they said the most that they would ever go for is getting basically a prescription or a referral from a veterinarian. So anyway, you're by no means protected in Mass, but I feel comfortable practicing, and ABMP covers me. ABMP is another good resource. That's it's an insurance organization, abmp.com. They won't cover you if they don't consider it legal in your state. So asking them if they consider it legal in your state, which by no means is binding to the state, can be another good place to book.
Yeah, that is a great organization. They're also big advocates for animal massage, so they may be in that supporter column if you do get involved in legislation in your state.
Do you know anything about British Columbia?
British Columbia is not regulated. Their veterinarian board has looked at the issue now 3 times, and each time they've come back with the decision that they don't want to regulate it. They don't want oversight of it. There is a organization called the British Columbia Animal Massage Association, and they do a really good job of getting information out there. So I would contact them because they'll have any current information on potential changes. So again, it's an currently unregulated environment, which means it's susceptible to possible change, but it's not currently regulated by the veterinarian board either.
Okay. Somebody put up the IAMB list, which again, I don't agree with their interpretation on Massachusetts, and some of their stuff's outdated, but it's a place to start.
Yeah. And I know like that that listing and the listing that Equinology put out, it was updated several years ago, but a lot of the information I don't think is current or accurate. I know Washington's not accurate on that chart either, and I don't think Oregon is either. So I would hold it in question to some extent. And also, when that list was compiled, it was the information was mostly interpretation from secretaries of the boards, meaning there were phone calls made asking, what's your position on this? And as I mentioned before, that interpretation can be really broad and it can be really confusing, because if you call the state board on 3 different days and talk to 3 different people, they'll tell you 3 completely different things in many cases. So again, really important to ask, can you direct me to the language, or can you direct me to the chapter in the bill where massage or acupressure or whatever your modality is addressed? So you want to see that specific language, not just take it on somebody's say-so. And I think some of those charts rely on information from people not qualified to interpret.
Okay, we had a question about Alabama, whether it's direct or indirect supervision.
I had that one. Animal massage by a massage therapist under direction of a licensed veterinarian. So direction of a licensed veterinarian does not imply supervision. So my guess would be that means that you have a relationship with a veterinarian for consult purposes.
And we will stipulate right now that we are not lawyers. So
yeah, thank you.
Just doing the best we can here.
Yeah,
And we had a question about Illinois, which you said was...
Well, that's the funny one, right? Because Illinois, if you speak to a lot of people in our industry and a lot of knowledgeable people, it's animal owners' rights. And they did do a lot of work a number of years ago in Illinois to ensure that animal owners had the right to access services and providers. However, the AVMA would disagree, because they say that a member in good standing of another licensed or regulated profession acting with informed consent from the client, so that does speak to the animal owner's rights, and under direct or indirect supervision and control of a veterinarian. So control of a veterinarian, obviously a very different thing than supervision, because in this case, they're making a clear point of using both language: direct supervision, indirect supervision, and control of a veterinarian. I don't know who would qualify for indirect versus direct, because usually it's one or the other, but it may be that that's covering a lot of different professions. They're just saying members in good standing of another licensed or regulated profession. So what that also means for Illinois is that if you're not regulated, you're not a recognized profession, then you probably wouldn't have protection under that interpretation, which is the AVMA's interpretation. So.
All right, we'll do a couple more questions, and we've been going on forever. Carolyn asks, most animal owners want some type of certification. Wouldn't this help to protect those providing the service? I find most people, well, I mean, I have it all over my website, but most people don't even ask me if I'm certified.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think consumers can do their own due diligence, so you don't have to be a victim if you ask the right questions, ask to see people's certification. That's one of the things that I think is brilliant about NABCAM is it provides another layer of credentialing for consumers. So consumers can go to NABCAM and see there is a standard of practice and there is a code of ethics that those members are agreeing to. So if you're certified through NABCAM, it does provide another layer of assurance for your clients. And I think that that's really valuable. But in the same breath, you know, it shouldn't be up to consumers to ensure that their animal is safe if they're hiring if somebody's putting themselves forth as a professional. I don't think a consumer should have to worry about whether that is true or not. So again, NABCAM certification guarantees that there's at least a minimum of training that you can rely on, but without some regulatory profession, I think the biggest threat is that consumers don't have any recourse. So, you know, the incident of risk to the animal or harm to the animal that's caused by most of our therapies is low or minimal, but you know, it can happen. It can happen that somebody mishandles an animal during a treatment session, intentionally or unintentionally, and that animal is harmed. In a non-regulated state, that individual will have very little recourse because, you know, they didn't hire the services of a professional. So from a protection standpoint, either through their insurance or just through state regulations, they may be very limited in their recourse.
Okay, and then last state we're going to do is Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Hey,
Wisconsin. All right. I think you guys hit every group of letters I had picked out. Wisconsin. Oh, wow. We might have found one that's not even listed by the AVMA. I have Washington, Wisconsin. Here we go. It doesn't list it under either. So it doesn't list it as restricted to veterinarian practice, and it doesn't list it under other considerations. So I would call that a non-regulated state, at least from the veterinarian's perspective. Now, the Board of Massage could have something in their law that isn't indicated here, but from most of us are concerned about the veterinarian boards because most states defer our work to the veterinarian board because we're working with animals. And, you know, part of their oath is to secure and protect the safety of animals in their state of licensure, whether they're clients or not. So, yeah, most states would defer to the veterinarian practice, and according to the AVMA, Wisconsin is not regulated or restricted.
All right. Thank you so much, Lola, for doing all that. And it was a great presentation.
Thank you. My pleasure. Sorry, I got off to a little rough start with my throat. Not really sure where that came from, but I thank everyone for joining us.
And I hope those of you who are practitioners will consider joining NABCAM, and instructions on how to get certified are at nbcaam.org. If you look at the certification tab, it'll tell you what schooling you need to get, and we provide an exam, and then you will be nationally board certified. And then, you know, we're always looking for volunteers. We are trying to support legislative efforts now, definitely in California, and then wherever it comes up. So our legislative committee is going to be where the action is.
So please come help.
Yes, please. Definitely. All right, looks like we have some nice comments coming in. We're going to finish up. And again, if you are a member, please sign up for our hospice acupressure. And then the next one is in November is going to be how to set up a massage program in your local shelter.
Oh, that'll be fun.
All right. Thank you, Lola. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.